The rules of the game were simple, Dave explained. Everyone must put $50 into the pot. Winner takes all. The winner was the one who won the poker hand and dared to give the loser a task that he would not have dared to complete. The only catch was that in order to receive the money, the person giving the task had to complete it himself. While Dave explained the rules and tried to get us all to play, we just laughed at him in various states of intoxication. The girls, in particular, stated that they would never play some stupid school game so that Dave could have fun. But not giving up, Dave persisted until his wife, Tammy, rather unfriendly, slapped him on the arm and walked into the kitchen, shaking her head. "Great, Tammy is with us," Dave proclaimed, rubbing his arm, and we all laughed again. "You're just an ass," Tammy said, heading into the kitchen to Laura, who was preparing a snack for us all. Honestly, I thought the game could be fun, but given the mood in the room, I wasn't going to be the one to say it out loud. I looked around the group, and despite the categorical refusals, I saw that I was not the only one who would not mind spicing up the party a little. Tammy clearly would have preferred that Dave just forget about the idea and seemed almost embarrassed by her husband's proposal. My wife Laura was one of the most vocal opponents of the game, but despite her protests, I knew that she would agree if others were also in favor. Of those remaining in the room, I was confident that Barry would join without hesitation. Honestly, I'm surprised it wasn't him who suggested the game. His wife, Deb, a dazzling blonde, was acting too playful, refusing to participate to be believable, and after the sexy dance she gave at one of our backyard parties a couple of months ago, I knew she wouldn't be shy if we let start playing. The last couple, Scott and Cheryl, were the most reserved in our group. Scott looked visibly uncomfortable discussing the topic, but Cheryl had the same look in her eyes as she did at that party, and I could tell she was intrigued by the idea, even if she didn't speak up. It's always like this with quiet people, I thought. The topic of the game was forgotten for a while, and we moved on to more casual conversations about kids, schools, work, and golf. Deb and Cheryl discussed the former, and the men discussed golf, or rather, wondered when the striped predator would return to the tournament and how he would play after almost a year's break. About 15 or 20 minutes later, Laura and Tammy returned to the living room with a huge tray of Laura's famous nachos and a couple pitchers of frozen margaritas. No sooner had Laura placed the tray on the coffee table than the real attack began. Dave's first chip was topped with cheese, sour cream, meat, and peppers, and "oh yeah," he opened his mouth to enjoy her. But before he could try, Cheryl grabbed his hand and guided that little feast into her own mouth. She couldn't eat it all, and the cheese and salsa ran down her chin. While we were all laughing at the look of mock indignation on Dave's face, Cheryl wiped the residue off her chin with her finger and made a show of seductively licking her finger and putting it in her mouth, as if simulating sex. Laura returned to the kitchen to get a bottle of Grand Marnier to add to her margaritas and returned just in time to see Cheryl sucking her thumb. "Hey, you started the game without me," she said with a smile. "No, we haven't started," Dave objected. "We were just waiting for you." Taking advantage of this moment, Dave grabbed a deck of cards, which he left on the table. He looked around the room and, hearing no objections, began to deal the cards. Tammy's face showed that she was unhappy, but she didn't say anything, so the game began. Dave dealt out the cards, and like amateurs, we picked them up one at a time. I immediately got a pair of jacks, but nothing else. Dave, as the dealer, was the last to raise his cards, but before doing so, he declared, "He who doesn't pay doesn't play," and we spent a few minutes getting our wallets out. I angered Laura by forcing her to bet her own money, even though Dave and Barry had each put in $100 for themselves and their wives. Scott only had $12, but Cheryl added the rest. Laura only had $20, and Dave angered her even more by refusing her request to write in IU. "He who doesn't pay doesn't play," he repeated. Irritated, Laura took out her checkbook and wrote out a blank check for the remaining $30. Throwing it on the table, she looked into my eyes and said, "Here, are you satisfied?" I knew from the look on her face that I had better be satisfied and nodded, knowing that she was now fully into the game. I could only wonder how far she was willing to go. Dave took the deck and turned to Tammy, who was sitting to his left. "How many?" he asked. "4," she answered, and all the men laughed. Dave dealt 4 cards to her and the same number to others before dealing 2 to himself. I didn't get the third jack, but I did get another 4 for 2 pairs, so I felt pretty confident when we showed up. It turned out that my 2 pairs were only the second result. Dave won with 3 queens. Laura, who only asked for 1 card, was left with 9 high, as she was short of a straight. She was the last one. "Well," she said, looking Dave in the eyes, "what is my task?" Without hesitation for a second, Dave blurted out, "Give me pleasure." All of us, except Laura, either exploded with laughter or were shocked, but Laura didn't bat an eyelid. She considered Dave's request for a second after everyone had quieted down and, looking at the pile of money, replied, "No." "Then I won," Dave announced solemnly. "I don't think so," Laura answered. "Well, you're not going to let me eat you, are you?" Dave asked, raising his eyebrows. "No, it's true." "Then I won," Dave said triumphantly again. "No," Laura said with an expression that I knew. She felt smart. "I don't think so. I think that in order for you to win, you will have to please yourself." Laughter erupted around the table at this moment, and then doubled as Dave, looking sadly down at his trousers, realized that he had been outsmarted. He looked to his wife Tammy for support, but she simply gave him that special smile that only a wife can give her husband when he's made a fool of himself, and said calmly, "Her words make sense." The fun and jokes continued for several more minutes until Dave, resigned, handed the deck of cards to Tammy with the words, "Your change." After that, everyone was very careful in how they worked their punishments. There were stupid tasks like Tammy having to crow like a rooster, me having to show everyone my butt, and Scott being forced to kiss the feet of everyone at the table. But soon the punishments began to be more intimate and sexual in nature. It all started when Scott won the round and, unexpectedly for such a shy man, asked Laura to kiss him. Laura stood up from her seat, walked around the table, and knelt in front of Scott, who was sitting on the floor. She took his face in her hands and looked deeply into his eyes. Slowly, Laura leaned towards Scott. Their faces began to get closer and closer. When their lips were almost close, Scott closed his own, closing his eyes in anticipation of the kiss. Laura immediately kissed his nose and returned to her seat while everyone else burst into laughter. The game did become fun, even Tammy started to enjoy herself, but it was clear that her personality had changed. Dave won the next round and Cheryl was the loser. "Kiss me," Dave ordered, and after a short pause he added, "on the lips." Cheryl, who was sitting to Dave's right, looked unsure. Scott, who was almost as shy as Cheryl, looked just as confused. Cheryl looked at him questioningly, and he just shrugged. With that, Cheryl leaned over and kissed Dave tenderly for a few short seconds. I noticed Dave lean in to continue, but Cheryl quickly pulled away, breaking the kiss. In the next few rounds, the theme of kissing continued, and each time the tasks became more and more intimate. "Kiss me on the lips for 10 seconds. Kiss me on the lips for 20 seconds with tongue." This went on and on. Laura had just kissed Barry for a full minute, and I was still trying to figure out how I felt about it when the flash combination came through. Tammy had a low pair of deuces. She hadn't participated in kissing punishments yet, and I didn't know how far she was willing to go. There was a chance that she would just joke and invite me to kiss myself, but I've kissed Tammy once before. It was a couple of years ago for New Year's when Barry and Deb had a party. Tammy then had too much to drink and, at the stroke of midnight, kissed all the men in the group in turn for a second or two. But when she approached me, I was surprised when her tongue entered my mouth, and she pulled me towards her with such passion that I did not expect. 15 to 20 seconds passed before she pulled away from me, kissed me lightly again, and said, "Happy New Year, Tim." Before I could respond, she was already kissing someone else. It was with the memory of this kiss that I decided to take a risk and made the following proposal: "Lie on me and kiss me for a whole minute." I was surprised, but delighted, when Tammy immediately got up and walked around the table to come up to me, who was sitting on the floor. She pushed me on my back and quickly positioned herself on top. I hugged her slender, athletic body, and hidden by her long golden brown hair, we began to kiss. I'd kissed both Cheryl and Deb for 15-20 seconds before, but the kiss with Tammy was different. He was completely sexy. It was a deep and passionate kiss. Our lips reached out to each other, and our tongues penetrated and searched for each other. But it was Tammy's quiet moan of desire that made this kiss special. I completely lost my sense of reality until I heard Dave shout, "Hey, enough already, you two." Reluctantly, we broke the kiss and Tammy returned to her seat at the table, smiling widely. I sat down and cleaned myself up. I glanced at Laura, who raised an eyebrow questioningly, Mr. Spock style. I just winked at her and began to wonder what she would do next. We didn't have to wait long. Dave won the next round and Laura lost to him for the first time after he asked her to do something special. The stakes seemed to have risen. I noticed that Laura was a little more nervous than she wanted to show, or perhaps it was excitement. I caught a slight tremor in her voice when she asked Dave. Well, Dave took a few seconds to think. You could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he contemplated his next task. Considering how Laura outwitted him last time, I knew that he would be much more careful this time. Then I noticed a mischievous glint in his eyes, and he blurted out, "Show your breasts." This was perfect, I thought. This would be a big step for the game, and maybe for Laura herself. If she refused, Dave wouldn't hesitate to take off his shirt to get his. But before I could finish that thought, although not before Tammy had slapped Dave again, Laura lifted her top and quickly exposed her firm breasts. And then she hid them so quickly that it seemed we didn't even have time to see anything. "Hey," Dave said indignantly. "It was too fast. I didn't even really look." "I think you just told me to show them, Dave," Laura said with a grin. "You didn't specify how long to show." We could only agree with her, much to Dave's chagrin. Now it was my turn to deal, and I quickly dealt the cards. After I folded 2 cards, I had 3 jacks, and was pretty sure I was going to win. But Laura finally got the same straight combination that she had been trying to collect all evening. Dave only had the king high card and lost. This is how the situation has changed dramatically. "Well, well, well," said Laura, rubbing her hands with pleasure. "What should I force you to do?" She thought out loud. I had several ideas in my head, but I didn't voice them. For some reason, the rest of the group also became quiet, which only added to the tension in the moment. Dave just sat there and waited, looking nervous, which alone made the entire event worth it. "Ashim," Laura said after a minute or two, continuing to ponder Dave's fate. "I know," she exclaimed. We all froze, waiting for Laura to announce Dave's punishment. Long moments passed while Laura looked at Dave, smiling slyly. Unbeknownst to them, everyone except Dave began to lean forward to hear what she had to say. "Take off your clothes," Laura suddenly said. And after a dramatic pause, she added, "and stay naked for the rest of the evening." "What?" asked Dave, who didn't seem to understand what Laura had said. "Take off all your clothes and stay naked all night," Laura replied. "Take off your clothes." Dave looked at Laura with disbelief, as if he couldn't believe that she had actually asked him to do this, and then he blushed. Whether from anger at being tricked again or from embarrassment, I don't know, but he didn't say a word. Barry and Tammy were laughing until they cried by this point, their initial shock giving way to amusement. Scott looked like he was ready to run away, and I noticed Cheryl's neck and upper chest starting to turn red with excitement. It was obvious that she wouldn't mind seeing Dave naked at all. He was by far the fittest and most physically developed of all the guys at the table. I watched as Dave looked at the money on the table and then back at Laura. Then he turned his gaze back to the money. While $300 was far from a fortune, it was still an amount worth considering in the game. I watched as Dave tried to decide if he could refuse the assignment, and if so, if Laura had the audacity to strip naked and take the money herself. I had no doubt that Laura would make it, and if Dave remembered her dancing on his porch a few months ago, he would have figured it out too. Judging by his face, he seemed to remember it. Resigned, Dave rose to his feet and began awkwardly unbuttoning his shirt. "Woo-hoo!" Laura shouted, triumphant. "Take it all off, Davy." The girls high-fived Laura and started chanting, "Take off your clothes, take off your clothes." Tammy clearly enjoyed the moment of her husband's defeat, and Cheryl blushed even more. We must give Dave his due. He quickly got into the game and, with music playing in the background, performed an awkward dance with elements of a striptease. The irony was that about halfway through undressing, the ZZ Top song "Sharp Dressed Man" came on and the girls squealed with delight. While he was filming each item, Dave periodically did a mini lap dance on one of the girls more for effect than anything else. Soon he was standing in front of Laura wearing only his boxers, which by this point looked more like a tent. "The winner takes the trophies," Dave told Laura. Stretching his arms to the sides, he added, "You can take them off me yourself." Like a cat, Laura knelt in front of Dave and seductively put her hands behind his waist. Laura carefully tried to help Dave take off his underwear, but due to the awkward position, she had to lift the fabric a little. As soon as this happened, she was only a few centimeters away from him. She helped him out of his clothes, and his boxers fell to the floor at his feet. Dave stepped out of them, moving a little closer to Laura. Their touch was accidental and quickly passed, and Laura immediately rose to her feet, a little embarrassed by the proximity of the moment. There was a slight embarrassment on her face, and the expression in her eyes betrayed her excitement about the situation. "Like what you see?" Dave asked with a grin. Apparently, he noticed her excitement. Laura, continuing to pretend to the last, only answered, "Maybe." She then turned to Scott, who was already shuffling the cards, and ordered, "Deal another hand." After the new cards were dealt, no one was in a hurry to lay out their combinations. I was definitely not in a hurry. I only had the eldest lady. Thinking, come what may, I put my cards on the table and looked at the others, waiting to see who would be assigned to me. Tammy laid out her cards next to mine, and to my surprise, I beat her. Her highest card was the 10 of spades. Cheryl was relieved to put down her cards, leaving herself with a high jack. Scott, Barry, and Deb played their cards, and while they beat me, they didn't have particularly strong cards. Feeling more confident, Dave showed a pair of eights, which turned out to be his strongest hand so far. Then we all looked expectantly at Laura, but no one looked at her with more fervor than Dave. With noticeable disappointment, Laura showed her hand. She did not get to the straight again, remaining with a 2, 3, 4, 5, and 9. She lost. Dave's victory cry could be heard from several blocks away, and believe me, until you saw a completely naked man excitedly marching around the room in victory celebration, you were missing out. It was the most absurd thing I've ever seen. I didn't know whether to laugh or console my wife, who understood from the expression on her face that she would now have to endure something. The others were enjoying the situation, and this time the object of ridicule and teasing was Laura, who was reminded of what she already knew. Dave would come up with something big for her. When the noise died down, I thought Dave would consider his assignment for Laura, but instead he quickly gave her the same task she gave him. "Take off your clothes and stay naked all night," he said with glee. With a slight shrug, Laura stood up and began to lift her t-shirt, but before she could expose her breasts, she lowered it again and sat down. "No, I guess I won't," she said confidently, and we all looked at Dave. "Then I win," Dave said for the second or third time that evening. We looked at Laura again. "No, I didn't win," Laura answered even more confidently. We looked at Dave again. "What do you mean?" Dave asked, and I felt anger boiling inside him at the thought that Laura had outsmarted him again. "Well, to win, you have to complete the task you just gave me," Laura began, "but to do this, you'll have to take off your clothes. And you can't undress because you're already naked. Moreover, if you put on clothes and take them off again, you will break the condition I gave you, because then you will not remain naked all night, and I will win." "She's right," Barry noted, earning him a displeased look from Dave. "You have to admit that her reasoning is logical," Tammy added. "You've encountered a superior mind today, darling, so you better get dressed, and we'll end this stupid game before it goes too far." A slight murmur of agreement passed through the room, and, albeit with a dissatisfied grunt, Dave began to get dressed. While he was putting on his clothes, Tammy took a stack of money and began giving everyone back their $50. However, when she handed the check to Laura, she raised her hands indicating that she would not be returned. "Wait a minute," Laura said. "I can still win this game." "What?" we asked in unison. "Well," Laura explained, "if I take off my clothes and stay naked all night, I'll win. Dave has already gotten dressed, so now all I have to do is complete the task I gave him." Her logic was again impeccable. Dave, feeling at least minimally satisfied with the outcome, said, "Come on, go ahead." At this point, none of us could object anymore. Without a moment's hesitation, Laura stood up and took off her top, exposing her breasts. Then she quickly unbuckled the belt buckle, unbuttoned her denim shorts, and pulled them down along with her bikini. As a result, she was left completely naked. After that, my now naked wife approached each of us and took $50 from our hands. I was stunned when she, keeping her back straight, turned her back on us and bent down to put the money in her purse, giving us a great view of her private parts. Almost in a whisper, but loud enough for everyone to hear, Barry muttered, "Great ass." Laura straightened up and turned to us. It was clear from the expressions on our faces that we were still slightly stunned by such a quick turn of events. "So, what does a naked girl have to do to get a drink?" she asked. Laura remained naked all evening, which lasted another couple of hours. Surprisingly, after a while, I stopped even noticing that she was naked. But I've seen her like this all the time. I'm not sure if Dave's or Barry's eyes ever left her breasts or her secret places, but Scott seemed to avoid looking altogether. As the evening drew to a close, we all gathered at the door, saying goodbye. Laura, still naked, calmly discussed with Tammy the recipe she wanted to make for us the next evening. Since Dave and Tammy lived just a few houses away, Laura said, "Wait, I'll get dressed and go with you to pick up the prescription now." "I don't think so," Dave replied with a grin. "As I remember, the condition was that you would remain naked until the end of the night." Laura looked at him for a second and said, "Cold, honestly, I don't understand why my wife couldn't wait until the morning to pick up the prescription. Maybe pride?" But Laura stood between Dave and Tammy, took them by the arms, and the three of them walked down the street to their house. We could only stand and watch with our mouths agape, except for Barry, who said again, "She has such a nice ass." I just nodded in agreement. 15 minutes later, I was sitting alone in the living room when Laura, still in her mother's clothes, walked through the door with a prescription in her hands. I looked at her. She looked at me. "I want you to make love to me," she said. "It's been a little over a month since the night we played Consequences poker. It seemed like every friend of mine who saw my wife naked was mentioning to me how amazed they were with Laura. Scott, always the most humble, surprised me the most when he said he had been fantasizing about her ever since. Barry admitted that he thought Laura was the sexiest woman he knew, which was strange given that his wife Deb is the typical blonde beauty that all men dream of. But Dave, poor Dave, literally couldn't stop talking about Laura every time we met. It took me several meetings with him to politely ask him to stop. He looked embarrassed when I told him this, seeming to realize that he had completely forgotten or ignored the fact that Laura was my wife. "Sorry," Dave said. I raised my hand. "Everything is fine. I know Laura is a sexy woman. I just don't want to hear it from you anymore." "Fine," I answered, not understanding his obsession. Since then, the topic has not been brought up again. Until this evening, Dave and Tammy and Barry and Deb came over for dinner. Scott and Cheryl couldn't make it because Cheryl had a migraine. We had dinner and drank margaritas, but soon there was silence at the table, which was interrupted by Dave asking, "Well, what do we do now?" "I'm going to clean up this mess," Laura replied. "Continue." "I'll help you," Tammy responded, and the two of them quickly sorted out the plates and bowls that stood in front of us. Dave, who clearly enjoyed watching the women at work, simply leaned forward and poured himself the rest of the margarita from the pitcher Laura and Tammy had left on the table as they headed into the house with their hands full. Leaning back and taking a long sip, he remarked, "Oh, this is life." I couldn't agree with him more, but unfortunately for Dave, his wife Tammy returned just in time to hear this remark and interrupted his moment by declaring, "Now get off your ass and go to the kitchen to make some more margaritas." Dave glanced at me, his bar buddy, but I just shrugged. Then he, with all the pathos he could afford, exclaimed, "Your desire is the law for me, the love of my life." With these words, he took the jug and with emphasized grace went into the house. "He's such a jerk," Tammy said, plopping down in the chair next to me. "Yes," I answered, "but you still love him." Tammy sighed, but turned to me and smiled. "Yes, I do." "He doesn't deserve you," I joked. "I know," Tammy replied with a completely serious look, and then, trying to hold back her laughter, burst into laughter. A moment later, we both laughed loudly. Barry and Deb joined in, and Dave was the butt of our jokes for a while. When he finally appeared at the patio door a few minutes later, we quickly fell silent. "Why does it seem to me that you were all discussing me?" he asked, placing a full pitcher of margaritas on the table and sitting down. "We," Deb asked innocently. "Yes, we would never in our lives talk about you behind your back." "Of course," Dave muttered, sitting down in a chair. At that moment, Laura left the house and joined us. She behaved as she had done all evening, but I couldn't help but notice a slight blush on her neck and upper chest, a blush that I had seen many times before in the bedroom. In fact, looking back, I realized that Laura and Dave had been in the kitchen much longer than it took to make a jug of margarita. In fact, I suddenly realized that this was the first time since the night Laura had come home from Dave and Tammy naked, when Laura and Dave had the opportunity to be alone. I immediately guessed what they could be talking about. But were they really just talking? I asked myself again. "So what do we do now?" Laura asked, plopping down in her chair. We looked at each other because we still haven't answered that question, even though Dave had already asked it a while ago. The evening was in full swing, and I knew we weren't going to leave, but I just shrugged my shoulders and said, "I don't know. Let's play poker with consequences again," Dave blurted out. He barely had time to finish when Tammy hit him even harder than he had suggested the game a few weeks ago. We all laughed and Tammy commented, "Pervert, you just want to see Laura naked again." "No, I just thought," Dave began. "Liar," Tammy interrupted in an icy tone, and it became clear that this was a sore topic for her. "You've only been talking about her since that night." "Is it true?" Laura asked animatedly, leaning forward. She already knew all this because she and I had discussed Dave's comments over the last few weeks, but she liked to embarrass him. "So you were thinking about me naked?" "No," Dave answered, casting a wary glance at his wife. Then, looking again at my wife Laura, who raised one eyebrow Spock style, he continued, "Well, I mean, I thought, but—" And there his speech was interrupted, because Tammy hit him again, causing another explosion. Laughter. Laura laughed the loudest. "You don't have to play poker to see me naked," Laura snorted. "All you have to do is ask." "Is it true?" Dave asked hopefully. "Yes," Laura replied with a wink, though I wasn't sure if she was winking at me, Dave, or Tammy. "I'll be happy to do it if you ask. The only thing you need is to convince everyone else to get naked too. After all, I was the only one who did it last time." This caused even more laughter and comments like, "Yes, of course," and "as if that's possible," from Barry, Tammy, and me. Even though Deb was laughing along with us, I noticed that thoughts were starting to swirl in her head. It's not like she's never been naked in our company. She was the one who initiated that sexy dance at the patio party a year or two ago, so I knew she had a hidden exhibitionist in her. She hadn't done anything like that since then, but I suspected that under certain circumstances she wouldn't hesitate to take off her clothes again. With her figure sculpted literally like a work of art, it's impossible not to be a little exhibitionist, right? No, I knew that the key obstacle, perhaps intentionally from Laura's point of view, was Tammy. I knew the boys, Dave and Barry, would be naked in no time, especially if it involved skinny dipping or something like that. But Tammy never crossed any sexual boundaries. Yes, we kissed passionately the night we played poker, but other than another drawn-out New Year's kiss years ago, Tammy never hinted at anything more. I didn't think she was a prude, but she never showed any overt sexuality, despite the chemistry we always had. Of all the girls at the table, Tammy was always the most conservative in dress. Today, as usual, her shorts were mid-thigh length and loose-fitting. She was wearing a cute but modest short-sleeved cotton blouse that was buttoned all but the top two. She looked cute, but her outfit did nothing to highlight her athletic figure, which I knew she was hiding. Deb made her look like a nun. Deb wore short white shorts and a tight, low-cut spaghetti strap tank that showed off her midriff. She was clearly braless, but the double lining of her top hid everything but the curve of her surgically enhanced breasts. However, her breasts were such that it was impossible not to look at them, and I looked many times. Laura, also in short shorts, wore a sports top similar to what professional volleyball players wear. Her top flattened her breasts a bit, making them look a little larger than usual. There was silence at the table for several minutes as Laura's proposal hung in the air. I saw Dave trying to think it through before he said, "Well, just undressing is a stupid idea. Maybe we can go skinny dipping," he asked, speaking more to Deb and Barry than anyone else. Barry just shrugged, still not sure where this was going. Deb blushed, but nodded slightly. "Okay," she muttered quietly, looking at Barry to see his reaction. He nodded too. Then Dave turned to his wife with a questioning look. Tammy's reaction was immediate. "You're a joker if you think I'm going to get naked so you can look at Laura again." "This will not happen." "But," Dave began. "No," Tammy interrupted, shaking her head furiously. "No," she repeated louder and noticeably angrier. "I won't." Looking around, I saw that Laura was triumphant her little trick had worked, but Deb looked almost disappointed. Dave wanted to say something else, but sensing that Tammy was in no mood to continue the discussion, he sat back in his chair with a disappointed, "Whatever." At that moment, the whole story seemed to come to a rather awkward conclusion. Dave sulked. Tammy was quietly seething with anger. Laura smiled in victory, having once again bested Dave, while Barry and Deb sat not knowing what to do or say. It was one of those moments where I just needed to change the subject and everything would work out. This is exactly what I should have done, so don't ask me why I quietly muttered, "Would you do that for me?" "What did you just say?" Tammy asked quickly, her voice still cold. Everyone else at the table turned their heads and stared at me. I met Tammy's gaze for a few seconds, and her eyes seemed to burn right through me. With the same uncertainty, I repeated, "Would you do this for me?" The silence at the table was deafening. Judging by the look on Dave's face, he couldn't believe I had the nerve to ask Tammy that question, given her mood. We all knew Tammy had a fiery temper, so I'm sure Dave thought even he would be smarter. And under Tammy's intense gaze, I wanted to be smarter myself. I glanced at Laura out of the corner of my eye to see how she was reacting, but she only had a curious expression on her face and one eyebrow raised like Mr. Spock. Gradually, all eyes around the table turned to Tammy, whose eyes never left mine. The seconds passed like minutes. Tammy's face softened a little as she looked at me. I thought she was beginning to understand that I didn't ask this question because I wanted Dave and Laura to have fun or to see Deb's magnificent breasts. I think she realized that I was asking because of the chemistry we had for years, that I was asking because I wanted to see her body. "Okay," Tammy said quietly, without taking her eyes off me. "What?" Dave asked. I said okay, Tammy snapped, half angrily, half with a hint of doom. "Wow," Dave exclaimed. He jumped up, grabbed Laura's hand, and dragged her towards the pool. Barry and Deb immediately got up and followed them. I tried to get up from the chair too, but Tammy put her hand on my chest and pushed me back. "You stay here," she ordered. I obeyed. Tammy stood up and turned her back to me, facing what was happening at the pool. Behind her, I saw that Dave had already taken off his clothes and was splashing in the water. Laura had already taken off her top and was trying to pull her shorts off her hips while Dave shouted, "Come on, take it off." Barry was already getting into the water, and I noticed that he was half ready. I would have looked at Deb if I had had the chance, but Tammy was blocking my view, and it would have been extremely impolite to peer at such a moment. "Idiot," Tammy said, looking over her shoulder at her husband. She then turned back to me and asked with a flirtatious smile, "So you want to see me naked?" confirming that she understood my question. I nodded. "Have you ever imagined me without clothes?" I nodded again and answered with a smile. Yeah, it was true. Tammy began playing with the top button of her blouse. "Have you ever fantasized about me?" she asked. I nodded again, although in reality it wasn't entirely true. I wasn't imagining it, but I was wondering what it would be like to be with her. Tammy was a beautiful woman, even if she didn't try to show it. Time seemed to slow down. I think it actually only took a minute or two for Tammy to get completely naked, but at the time it felt like I was watching it happen in slow motion. Every gesture she made seemed exaggerated, and I memorized every detail. As the top button of her blouse was undone, Tammy's fingers moved to the next, then the next, and with each movement, the blouse parted a little more, revealing a lacy white bra that stood out against her smooth, tan skin. A couple more buttons, and I could already see the curved line of her stomach, hinting at her toned abs. Although the evening was not cool, her skin was covered with goosebumps, and her fine, silky hairs stood on end with excitement. Finally, the last button was undone. Tammy shrugged her blouse off her shoulders, letting it fall behind her, before carefully placing it on a nearby chair. I had seen Tammy in a swimsuit many times, but now I looked at her completely differently. In front of me was not just a mother of two children and a former student athlete, but a creature more reminiscent of a graceful cat. Her body was slender and toned, with muscles clearly visible in the flickering light of the street lamps, and yet completely feminine. I couldn't look away as Tammy unbuttoned the top button of her shorts. She slowly pulled the zipper down halfway, creating a V-shaped frame around her belly button, and froze. She looked at me as if deciding whether she wanted to continue. Then her hands went to the clasp of her bra between her breasts. She hesitated for a moment, but then parted the halves, exposing her breasts to me for the first time. Tammy didn't have large breasts, but they were perfectly shaped and had a scattering of freckles between them that I found incredibly sexy. Her breasts looked full and perky, much larger than I had imagined for a size that I assumed was a maximum B. For a second, I thought she was the sexiest woman I had ever seen in person. If Tammy had stopped at that point and taken nothing else off, I would have been completely satisfied. The image of her standing in front of me, topless, with her hands on her hips and her shorts slightly unbuttoned, is forever imprinted in my memory. But Tammy didn't stop. She turned 90 degrees towards me, so I was looking at her in profile, and began to slowly pull her shorts down her hips. I think she just didn't want to bend over and openly show her butt to those having fun by the pool. While they were still making noise and laughing, I saw that some of them glanced in her direction. Ignoring them, Tammy stood up, bringing her legs together and straightened like a string. She then slowly bent down, pulling her shorts down the rest of the way. At that moment, she reminded me of the start of swimmers at a competition when the judge shouts, "To the start, attention." Her buttocks looked perfect in profile. Every muscle on his thighs and buttocks stood out in the streetlights. She straightened up, turning her back slightly towards me, then leaned back again, arching her back in a classic pin-up girl pose. Her arms rested on the table and her legs spread slightly, giving me an incredible view of her buttocks and her intimate area barely covered by lace lingerie. She tilted her head forward, then abruptly threw her hair back, letting long strands of blonde hair fall down her back. After that, she turned her head towards me and smiled. How I wished I had a camera with me back then. Behind Tammy, I saw her husband, Dave, standing in the pool with an expression of complete amazement. He seemed unable to believe that his wife was showing herself to me so openly. I think he was about to say something, but Laura swam up behind him and dunked him headlong into the water, exclaiming, "You did great, girl." Tammy straightened up, gave Laura a thumbs up in approval, and then turned back to me. Now she stood just a step away from me, her legs spread so that my knee was between them. My face was right in front of her intimate area. "Well, are you ready for the finale, big boy?" Tammy asked. I threw my head back, looked up, and my face was framed by her breasts. "Uh-huh," I muttered in response. "Then they're all yours," Tammy said with a smile, lifting the waistband of her thong slightly before letting it go. I quickly straightened up and moved closer. I hooked my fingers around the top of her thong and slowly began to pull it down. My attention was focused on her soft skin. I leaned back in my chair and looked Tammy up and down, enjoying her beauty. When our eyes met, she smiled and asked, "Do you like what you see?" "Yeah," I nodded. Tammy looked at me with a sly smile and then added, "It's always yours whenever you want it." Before I could even process what she meant, she turned around and walked towards the pool, leaving me stunned. Now unfazed by her nakedness, Tammy climbed onto our little diving board. All eyes were on her, and she stood still for a moment, placing her hands at her sides. Then, with a precision that I knew came from years of practice, as a child, Tammy made a perfect swan dive, leaving almost no ripples as she entered the water. While the others clapped and cheered, I watched as Tammy made powerful breaststroke and frog leg strokes, pulling herself under the water to the far edge of the pool. She appeared right in front of her husband, wrapped her arms around his neck, and immediately kissed him passionately. Dave's arms wrapped around her in a surprised response, and I couldn't help but wish for a second or two that those arms were mine. A few moments later, I joined everyone in the pool. Once in the water, I endured the whistle caused by my excitement, and both of the other girls high-fived Tammy in congratulations. Laura swam up to me. I pulled her towards me and kissed her. She reached between my legs. "Did you have fun?" my wife whispered in my ear. "A little," I whispered back. "I can't believe Tammy did this," Laura answered again, still quietly. "You have no idea," I said. "What do you mean?" Laura asked me to step back and look at me questioningly. "I'll tell you later," I replied. I was still struggling with my thoughts about what happened. The night became cool, so we didn't swim anymore. Compared to the heightened level of arousal I had experienced earlier, nothing interesting happened in the pool or hot tub where we ended the night. In fact, by the time the girls were ready to go out and get dressed, the girls were back to their old tricks, telling us that they wouldn't be able to go out first, just so us boys could gawk at them. Neither Dave nor I could figure out what difference it made at that moment, but all the boys got out of the bathtub, grumbling, grabbed our clothes, and headed to the room Laura and I called the cabana. The cabana was really just the entry area from our house to the backyard, but Laura and I designed it so we had a place to change while going to or coming back from the pool. We had a small bathroom further down the house with a shower, so that worked great. I let the other two guys shower first, reminding them to leave enough hot water for the girls. By the time the guys got out of the shower, the girls were already waiting their turn, so like a gentleman, I let them pass in front of me. Tammy went first, leaving me with Deb and Laura, dressed only in towels. When the doorknob started to jiggle, Deb threw off her towel and purposely gave me one last good look before stepping into the shower that Tammy had just vacated. "You sure are enjoying the show today," Laura said with a smile as Deb closed the door. I answered again, "You have no idea." A few minutes later, Deb came out of the shower, already dressed, and told us that the hot water was starting to run out. Laura grabbed my hand and pulled me into the small bathroom with her. Moments later, under the stream of only warm water in the shower stall, Laura found herself in my arms. A moment later, I already felt intense excitement. Lifting Laura up, I held her close to me as she wrapped her legs around my waist. We were so close to each other that I could feel her breathing as the hot water flowed over us. We laughed and enjoyed the moment until suddenly the hot water ran out and a cold stream splashed over us. This stark contrast added a touch of surprise, and, unable to bear the cold, we jumped out of the shower, laughing and shivering from hypothermia. Laura was gorgeous. Her skin was covered with goosebumps and her eyes were shining. We covered ourselves in towels, warming each other, enjoying the moment of closeness and the warmth that was felt despite the cold water. Although this moment could have become even more intimate, Laura gently stopped me by placing her hand on my chest. We smiled at each other, realizing that there were still many wonderful moments ahead that could be shared together. "That's enough," Laura joked. "Moreover, we still have guests." "Yes, I know," I said, thinking that they could do without us for a few more minutes, but still reluctantly began to put on shorts and a t-shirt. "But," Laura said with a long, dramatic pause. "What?" I asked. Laura smiled at me with that sly smile that said she had naughty thoughts spinning in her head. "When you have sex with me later, will you tell me everything that happened between you and Tammy today?" "Maybe," I said with a smile, "but I thought that most likely it would be so. Will you tell me what you and Dave were doing in the kitchen?" "What?" Laura looked a little stunned at first, and then pretended to be innocent. "We didn't do anything." "Of course," I joked, remembering the blush I had seen on her breasts earlier. "Maybe your memory will improve later when I fuck you." "Maybe," Laura answered with a sly smile, "or maybe not. Everything will depend on what you tell me." After everyone had finally left, I went out into the yard to clean up after the party while Laura tidied up the kitchen. The girls did a good job before leaving, so all I had to do was clean the grill and close the pool for the night. I stood looking out at the crystal clear water and wondered if I should swim a few laps before bed, but just as I was thinking about it, Laura looked out the patio door. "Are you going to bed?" she asked. Remembering the sexual promises Laura had made earlier, I responded, "I'm already on my way. I'll be waiting," Laura said with a smile and closed the glass door with a light sound. "You won't wait long," I said to myself. I quickly finished the pool and returned to the house through the kitchen. Knowing that we wouldn't have to sleep just yet, I poured each of us a glass of Merlot. I turned off the light and, with 2 cups in my hand, headed towards our bedroom at the other end of the house. The house was dark, but I could make my way through the flickering light coming from our room at the end of the hallway. Entering the bedroom, I was greeted by another sexy sight. Laura, naked as the day she was born, sat at the head of the bed, her knees drawn up to her chest. In the soft, warm light of the burning candles scattered around the room, she looked almost angelic in her innocence. She smiled when she saw the wine in my hand. "You think about everything," Laura praised me softly. Then, changing the situation completely, she assumed an open position, inviting me to come closer. "Now come here," she said with a smile. Without wasting any time, I put the glasses of wine on the nightstand and took off my shirt. Still wearing my walking shorts, I knelt down next to the bed and pulled Laura closer to the edge of the mattress. Realizing her desire, I decided not to delay getting started, as I usually did, but to get straight to the point. I spread her thighs slightly and leaned closer to feel her closeness. A light, delicate aroma emanating from my wife hovered in the room, creating a special atmosphere. I touched her gently, gradually intensifying my touch. Laura's reaction was immediate. She shuddered in response to my actions, and I continued to give her even more pleasant sensations. With each new touch, I saw her relax and enjoy the moment, and her quiet signs and movements spoke for themselves. My goal was clear: to bring her joy and make this moment truly special for both of us. Knowing that my lover was exactly where I wanted her, I gently pushed Laura towards what I knew would be the highlight. Years of experience have allowed me to better understand her desires, and during this time I have learned many lessons about how to please her. I knew what to do to make Laura feel at the peak of her feelings without going over the edge. The longer I held her in this state, the more intense her final response became, but I had to be careful not to wait too long. That evening I understood that it would not take much time. After a minute or two, I felt Laura tense up, indicating that she was very close to climax. I intensified my efforts, continuing to act in the way she liked best. Her breathing became more ragged, and her body froze in a moment of pleasure. When I realized that this moment had come, I added a little more effort to bring it to the final. "Oh my God," Laura said, breathing heavily. Her body responded to every touch, and the expression on her face spoke for itself. After a while, as her breathing began to calm down, I slowed down and stopped, allowing her to recover. Her body took some time to respond to the recent sensations, and I allowed this moment to stay with us. Looking at her, I understood how important and meaningful this moment of intimacy was for us. I quickly took off the rest of my clothes and climbed onto the bed, kneeling next to Laura. I gently pulled her towards me, touching her body with tenderness and care. Laura looked at me with a sparkle in her eyes, and her breathing quickened as I approached her. I slowly ran my hand along her back, feeling her skin warm under my touch. We enjoyed the moment of intimacy, giving ourselves completely to each other. I felt a passion flaring up between us that needed an outlet. We moved together, feeling the rhythm created by our senses. Laura responded to my every move, and her quiet moans filled the room with a special atmosphere. I tried to be as gentle as possible, supporting her and feeling how our bodies merged into a single rhythm. Every moment was filled with passion and warmth, and we both felt that there was nothing more important right now than this connection between us. It was an evening filled with deep feelings and mutual understanding, a moment that I wanted to keep in my memory forever. In my heart, I thanked the wine and beer we had drunk earlier, because it was the only thing that kept me from climaxing too quickly. I was so aroused that I normally wouldn't have lasted long given our closeness, but the alcohol had slightly desensitized me, allowing me to maintain control and prolong this moment for a few more minutes. I lost track of time, completely lost in my feelings and physical connection with Laura. "Come on, honey, don't stop," Laura urged me, moving more and more passionately. She got so carried away that our movements became erratic, and I wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her closer to me. We rolled onto our sides, exchanging hot kisses. Laura threw her leg over my thigh, and I felt her closeness again. This moment was filled with something almost primal, and our touch expressed the full strength of our feelings. When we reached the peak, our bodies shook and we froze, completely surrendering to this moment. Afterwards, we lay entwined with each other, catching our breath. Our bodies were glistening with sweat, and for a while we simply enjoyed this feeling of togetherness. Laura whispered in my ear how good she felt, and I only hugged her closer to me. We continued to hug, gradually calming down after the intimacy we had experienced, enjoying the peace and warmth of each other. Inevitably, we had to freshen up, and after a quick shower and an equally necessary change of bed linen, we found ourselves back in each other's arms. "So," Laura asked coquettishly, "it was all about Tammy?" "It depends," I answered, although I myself thought that this question should have been asked to her herself. "Depends? From what?" "Depends on whether this has anything to do with what you and Dave were doing in the kitchen." "What do you mean?" Laura asked innocently. "Did Dave pester you in the kitchen this evening? Were you flirting with him?" I asked more bluntly than I had intended, although I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear the answer. I hoped that everything that happened in Cancun was in the past, but if it wasn't, I needed to know. Moreover, I needed to know if I would be the last to know about this, because Tammy's behavior today gave me strange thoughts. Something was clearly happening. Laura looked at me for a few moments, considering her answer. There was no emotion on her face as she said, "Maybe." And then, after a pause, she added, "Shall we discuss this in the morning?" "Okay," I said and kissed her goodnight. Lying in bed, I replayed the memories of Cancun in my head. My insides instantly sank. Although it was my own decision and I consciously participated in everything, the exchange of partners, as was the case in Cancun, was completely contrary to my nature. I would never have done this if I had not been sure that it was necessary to save our marriage. I understood that Laura and I are very different. We have different needs. When we first met, Laura was dating a lawyer whom she accompanied to a charity golf tournament that my company organized annually. We accidentally ended up in the same group. It didn't take me long to realize that her date was a cocky asshole. On the third or fourth hole, Laura and I were left alone by the golf carts while the others made their shots. "Who is this pompous guy?" These were literally the first words I said to her, besides greeting her at the beginning of the day. "Oh, he's just a guy I met at a party a couple of weeks ago. We spend time together from time to time. Despite what you see today, He's basically normal, I think, Laura replied with a slight laugh, and I immediately fell in love with her smile. And you and him. Well, seriously? I asked hopefully. Seriously? With Todd? She laughed. No, we're just having sex. What? I reacted, clearly shocked by her directness. Sorry, Laura said, noticing my confusion. Todd and I met through mutual friends a few weeks ago. We slept together, then met a couple more times. No, we're not serious. Okay, I said, and from that moment we were together. Over the ensuing years, I learned a lot about Laura. She came from a wealthy family, but had no means of her own. Her parents paid for her education, but completely withdrew her financial support when she announced that she would not work in the family business. Perhaps someday she will receive an inheritance, but this will not happen soon. At that time, she worked as a sales representative for a company selling cosmetics and body care products. It was a job, but clearly not a path to wealth. And Laura knew what wealth was. Luckily for her, many of her friends were wealthy, and she hung out with them all the time. And for a while, so did I. In the first few months of dating, we took a trip to Mexico on a private yacht, flew the two of us to Las Vegas on a private jet to join her friends for a party, and spent 2 3-day weekends at her friend's house in Malibu. It was a lifestyle that I always envied until I experienced it myself. Everything turned out to be so superficial, although these moments helped me get to know Laura better. Over the years, many exciting events have happened. Laura and I joined the 35K foot club on our flight to Las Vegas and again on the way back. On the yacht, 90% of the women, including Laura, preferred to spend their days topless. I've never seen so many bare breasts before. To my surprise, you quickly get used to it. It was the same at parties in Malibu. A lot of nudity, touching, kissing. The couples clearly spent time with different people over the course of the same weekend. At first I was jealous because of the attention Laura was getting, but since she ended up in my arms every night, I just accepted it as it was. We had fun, but at the same time it was sad. Behind all this fun, there was no feeling of happiness. I don't know if Laura herself realized this, but she seemed to be thinking the same thing. She increasingly refused invitations, preferring to spend time alone with me. We went on hikes, watched movies, cooked amazing dinners, and ate them on the couch in front of the TV. We stayed up until night and slept until noon. We fell in love. Over the course of 15 years, Laura and I built a good life. My career developed and my income became more than decent for me, although for Laura's family it was not so much, although we rarely saw them. We bought a house, then a bigger house with a pool. Made friends. Life was good until Laura got this itch. Cancun seemed to weaken her, but did not cure her. And this, I thought, lying in the dark, had to be decided once and for all. Tomorrow's conversation promised to be interesting. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.